The triangle trade was a brutal economic cycle that fueled the growth of the modern global economy. It connected three continents through a network of forced labor and resource extraction. Europe provided manufactured goods such as textiles and weapons, which were shipped to Africa to facilitate the capture of human beings. Traders then forced millions of Africans into the Middle Passage, transporting captives to the Americas under horrific conditions to provide labor for plantations. Finally, raw materials like sugar, cotton, and tobacco produced by enslaved labor were shipped back to Europe, generating massive wealth that catalyzed the Industrial Revolution. This cyclical engine of racial capitalism relied on the dehumanization of millions to build the foundations of industrial society. The Middle Passage was the brutal oceanic crossing from West Africa to the Americas. It served as a primary site of systemic dehumanization, where millions were transported against their will. The conditions were catastrophic. Mortality rates across these voyages ranged from 10 to 25%. This reflects the immense scale of human life lost during these crossings. Crucially, this period was not defined by passivity. It was a site of sustained resistance. Enslaved individuals preserved their intellectual, linguistic, and artistic traditions, which acted as a foundation for the resilient cultures formed in the Americas. Quantitative data from the Slave Voyages database reveals the scale of this forced migration. Between 1501 and 1867, approximately 12.5 million Africans were shipped across the Atlantic. Of those, 10.7 million survived the brutal Middle Passage. Common misconceptions often inflate the number of captives brought to North America. In reality, the vast majority were taken to Brazil and the Caribbean. Nearly 40% were transported to Brazil, another 40% to the Caribbean, while North America accounted for approximately 4 to 5% of the total arrivals. The history of the enslaved is not merely a record of victimhood. It is a profound account of agency. Individuals carried with them sophisticated agricultural techniques, complex languages, and vibrant artistic traditions that survived against all odds. Resistance was a constant thread. It manifested through the quiet power of maintaining cultural continuity, the building of strong community networks, and open, courageous acts of rebellion against systemic violence. Through this enduring spirit, enslaved populations did not simply adapt. They transformed the landscape of the Americas, creating rich, syncretic cultures that define the modern world today. By 2026, technology has fundamentally changed how we study the past. AI-driven sonar systems are locating lost slave ships with unprecedented precision. Genetic genealogy now allows descendants of the enslaved to map their specific regional and ethnic origins in Africa. These advancements translate abstract historical data into tangible, personal narratives, allowing us to reclaim lost stories. Museums in major cities are undergoing a profound transformation known as decolonization. They are recontextualizing artifacts to center the lives of the enslaved, rather than the wealth of the merchants who profited from the trade. This process involves relabeling artifacts and displays. A display once focused on mercantile success is now framed through the names, origins, and stories of those who were dehumanized. Sites like the Ouida port in Benin, often called the Gate of No Return, are now focal points for reflection. Preservation efforts here emphasize the spiritual and cultural loss experienced by West African societies, ensuring the human cost remains central to our collective memory. By decolonizing museum spaces, we move from passive narratives of trade to active acknowledgments of human agency and systemic violence. Memory is no longer a monument to the past, but an active engagement with our history. The transatlantic slave trade was not merely an historical event. It created an economic structure whose ripple effects define global wealth inequality today. Centuries of labor extraction built massive wealth for colonial powers, while creating systemic barriers for African and Caribbean economies. Today, organizations like CARICOM are moving beyond apologies, actively negotiating frameworks for reparatory justice and economic development. We must frame the slave trade as an ongoing process. It remains the primary catalyst for the modern global economy and the inequalities we navigate today.